Welcome to my Ducati rear rotor replacement video. Today I'm going to show you how to replace the rear rotor and the brake pads on your Ducati Superbike. First we're going to clip the zip tie that holds the lock ring in place, and then we're going to break free the nut on the axle. Lucky me, I went out for a 300-mile ride, and when I got home, one of my rear brake pads had eaten through the rotor. As you can see by the dark ring on the rotor, it did a little bit of damage. So now I'm going to loosen up the bolts that hold the rotor in place. We want to do this while the brake caliper is on the bike. This is a two-person job, so you will need someone to hold the brake lever down while you loosen each one of these rotor bolts. Just take two out at this point. If you take all four out, your rotor's going to be flopping around while you're trying to remove your caliper. Now I'm going to remove the caliper bolts. This one came off pretty easy. And as you see, I rounded out the inside of the other one. So here are my vice grips, and I'm breaking this free. So the replacement bolt for that, if you go down to Lowe's, you can get Hillman bolt. It's going to be M8. 1.25 by 20 is the bolt you're looking for. This is M8 1.25 by 20, and that's a perfect match for the Ducati bolt that you're gonna round out at least one of them trying to remove yours. So once you get those bolts out, your caliper will slide right off the rotor. And you can see the dark ring where my brake pad went into the rotor. So once your caliper's out of the way, go ahead and take your socket and remove the last two rotor bolts. And now your rotor will just come right off. A little twist, it comes right off. So it's damaged pretty bad. My bike has 47,000 miles on it. I want to thank whoever in the Tampa Bay area either totaled or got their bike stolen, because I was able to get this replacement rotor for 70 bucks shipped. A lot cheaper than buying a new one. And I don't buy a lot of things made in China, so I'm not buying one of the Chinese rotors and trying them out on my bike. I'll let you do that. So I put a little bit of blue Loctite on the bolt, and then I'm going to thread two of them back in. It's a good idea to get two of them threaded in and get your rotor lined up. Once you tighten down these two, the other two should slide right in easily. We're going to torque these down last. We can't tighten these 4 bolts up now because we need the caliper and we need a second person pushing on the brake lever to hold the caliper in place so we can get proper tightness on the rotor bolts. Now we're going to put in the last 2. The drop of blue Loctite on each bolt. These bolts should last another 47,000 miles. This was my 3rd set of brake pads that I had gone through. The first 2 sets were Brembos. I got 8,000 miles out of the first set. I was at 20,000 miles when I replaced my second set. And my 3rd set were EBC, and they lasted me up to I'm right sitting at 47,000 miles on the bike right now, so that's pretty good out of the EBC. And I'm going to replace the EBC with the long-lasting EBC Sport Touring. I believe they're a Kevlar composite brake pad, so I'm hoping I can get another 25,000 miles out of the next set of EBCs. So I'm going to remove the little clip that holds the retaining pin on for the brake pads, and I found that if you take a small hammer and you just tap that pin, it'll release the spring on the other side, and then you just take a pair of vice grips and you'll slide that pin right out and the spring will pop out. So there's my old EBC pads, and you can see how it's metal on the outer one. So we're going to replace with the EBC FA 256V, which are the Sport Touring pads. With the old pads back in the caliper, we're going to take a screwdriver and we're going to pry them apart. Now, if you regularly change your brake fluid on your bike, you're going to need to open up the reservoir and suck some of the fluid out of the reservoir so the reservoir from your caliper has somewhere to go. So I have my pistons now back into the caliper where they belong. When I put my EBC pads in, mine are dropping in just nicely. I did have to ground down the edges. The EBC pads aren't an exact fit for the Ducati. They're a little bit too wide for the caliper. So this is the second set that I've put on the bike, and I've actually had to grind off the edges just so the brake pad would slide into the caliper. So now we want to push our spring down into place and send that pin home. This actually takes maybe 3 or 4 hands to do it, but we only have 2, so it's kind of a pain in the ass. I think Ducati could have done a better job on designing that. Not really Ducati, but Brembo could have done a better job of designing that. But once you get the pin through the spring and through the other pad, take your vice grips and try to line it up with the hole on the other side of the caliper. So with it lined up in that hole, we want to give it a few good taps to get that pin all the way through and the little spring that's on that pin to seat inside the caliper. And we definitely want to put our retaining clip back on. That retaining clip's kind of important if you like stopping or dragging your rear brakes in the turn. Last thing you want to do is go down the road and not have any brake pads back there. So with my my new bolts, I went ahead and replaced both bolts with the Hillman M8 1.25 by 20 bolts. They're hex head bolts. They're I think they're $1 at Lowe's for 2 of them. So I'm going to slide my caliper up onto my new to me brake rotor, and I'm going to take my new Lowe's bolts with a drop of blue Loctite on, and I'm going to put my rear caliper back on. I like the orange pads. They kind of add a little style when you look down at the caliper through the black wheel on the motorcycle. You can see that orange in the caliper. I know that's only going to last a day until they're black again, but kind of looks cool. So remember, once you get your caliper on, go find your friend or your wife or girlfriend or your significant other, your life partner, whoever's at your house, and have them come out and hold your brake lever down so you can tighten up the bolts on the rotor. And don't forget to zip tie your wire to your brake line. Last thing you want is that wire getting caught in your chain or sprocket, dangling loose under the bike. And now we're going to line up the rear wheel to the pins on the axle. We're going to put our spacers back on. And our retaining nut. I hope everyone knows what the torque specifications are for this. My torque specifications are tighten that nut down as tight as you can get it, and it pretty much always falls in line to where the hole on the axle meets up with the one on the nut and the lock ring goes in place. As long as your lock ring is secured on the bike, I really doubt that you're going to lose this nut at any time. You would be nuts if you think you're going to lose that nut. It's always a good idea to make sure you have a zip tie or a piece of safety wire holding that in place. I've seen guys that retaining clip is actually popped off the bike. This is pretty much the end of my show. I hope you've enjoyed. Tell all your friends and neighbors, keep those cards coming. Thanks for watching.